Hey everybody, Asher here, and today we're going to be starting something on the channel that I've been wanting to do for a while, and that is book discussion, book talk, book clever title, whatever you want to call it here. So it'll be some good, some bad, some ugly, to be honest. But I want to start off with my favorite book that I read last year in 2024, which is A Brief History of Living Forever. Pardon the glare on here. It's silly to hold that up when I have the picture up on the left as well. But it is by Jaroslav Kalfař. And you may know him from the book that was made into a movie recently, Spaceman of Bohemia. Didn't see the movie, so I can't tell you how that is, but it's a great book then. And this follow-up, it's not a sequel, but follow-up, his second book actually has a lot more going for it. I think it's actually, honestly, a better book. Believe it or not, because I really like the previous one. But what is really interesting about it is Jaroslav is a Czech author. He lives in the United States of America, and this book is very much written in a Czech style. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Kafkas of the world or literature, things like that, let me just put it this way. Czech literature, a lot of times, things don't really track like you may want to see, where it's like, oh, we're going towards this happy ending, or we're going towards this sad ending, or sometimes, well, in the Czech world, if you're familiar with European history at all, they've had to suffer a lot, and one of the ways they get through it is kind of through just a comedy, almost, to say, not necessarily a great comedy, a ha-ha comedy, but it's like, well, isn't it funny that everything's shit? So what stood out with this book? It is really hard for a book written in 2023 to call this speculative fiction, looking at a near future 2030. It takes place sort of in two areas. One is in America, which has been taken over by a very xenophobic technocracy society, very much a surveillance state, very much a limited immigration state. Like I said, not very speculative, but also there is a view of it from Europe as well, with a similar rise of neo-Nazi sentiment and anti-refugee not furor yet, but furor at this point. Climate change has already rendered whole chunks of the world, including Western Florida, as uninhabitable, which is important for the plot. But yeah, like I said, the setting here is very on the nose. Like I said, very Czech style, but a little bit maybe discomforting considering certain election results in America at the end of 2024, even really election results in Europe this past week. So it's still a very good book to read for a number of reasons, though. And one of the things that I really like about it is the plot structure. And if you've watched any other videos I do, I like to talk about plot of stuff a lot. And what Mr. Kalfař does really is difficult to pull off here, where he has competing narratives. And he did this in his last book as well, where you have sort of the main story on one hand, and you have a sort of flashback frame story on the other hand. So it's not just a strict flashback of like, here's all the stuff that's happening 1, 2, 3 to give you some context. But you do follow Adela, who is the main character of the story. And in 2030, well, 2029 really, she has terminal cancer and is about to die. And we'll get back to her in a minute, because a lot of what the book focuses on is her first stint in America back in the 1970s or 80s. Cue Morris Moss crying, oh, it's set in the 80s, but still, where she goes to America as an undocumented person because she is escaping the Soviet takeover of Czechoslovakia. And I love Kalfař constantly going into Czech history that was not taught to me in American high school or American college. So good to learn more about that. But at the same time, she gets to America and is kind of swept up into this very interesting film production of adaptation of, once again, Czech author, another thing here, of a War of the Newts, which is written by Karel Čapek. And this is also a very famous work of science fiction as well. So, and the really interesting thing about the frame story is that you get kind of a look at 80s America, how 80s immigrant was kind of be able to get through, kind of slip through the cracks, how you have someone like Adela who has absolutely no acting experience, but for some reason gets to be the lead role in this independent movie. And very much things do not go well. I'm not really here to spill the whole plot for you, but just you have a structure here where you have these constant flashbacks to this old person with terminal cancer sort of reliving her past. And then how you get there is you have Adela, who has gotten her diagnosis in 2029. She's gotten her diagnosis. her job as a cashier at a grocery store, I forget if it's Lidl or Aldi, but one of those, she's been replaced by AI, so she has nowhere to go, nothing to do. She's going to die. So what she decides to do is, you know what? I have a daughter in America that I haven't talked to since I gave her up for adoption, but I've been following her, and she's had this meteoric rise up with a biotech company. And so her one crazy dream is, let me go to America, go see my daughter. Of course, she's able to get through the immigration process into America for two reasons. One is because she's the right kind of white person immigrant. And two is because, hey, wasn't she in some weird indie flick back in the 70s or 80s or something, which we learn a lot more about that later. But yeah, she ends up going to America, and you think, okay, here's this beautiful story about reuniting and things like that. But no, we're just a few pages in and Adela dies. In a very Hitchcock kind of move, you have a narrator shift where you have Adela's sort of timeline story, 2030, of she dies after meeting with her daughter, Teresa, and her body just disappears. And it's the story of Teresa having to go and find out what happened to my mom's body, as being told by Adela, who's dead. Which we're going to get to that in a second, because if you see what's written at the top up here, one of the things I really liked about this book, and if there's a lesson as someone who is currently writing, and I'm a firm believer that a good writer of fiction is also a good reader of fiction. It's not a requirement, but you got to do some active reading and pay attention. One thing that I really like here is that the author here, Kalfař, does not forget what his characters want. But how the hell do you have a character say what they want when they're already dead? Well, that's where we have the story of A Brief History of Living Forever. So you have, I'm not going to sell it to you entirely, because I really do want you to read the book. But one of the things that's great about the 2030 look is that it's not really a twist. You know how some authors, and we're going to do this in some other book discussions, really try to be like, oh my God, twist, it's crazy, they're all robots or some shit. No. It is, the ball is not hidden from the reader at all. You don't even have to pay very hard attention. It's pretty clear to the reader of, okay, this is what's going on. But to the characters, to Adela herself, who's an old lady at this point, she does not know what's going on. All she knows is that she's still able to see some kind of as this floating spirit following her daughter around, being like, wow, I can see that's everything that's going on with Teresa, how she bails on her work with Vita, complete with their shiny, crazy, super rich oligarch out of touch people. Once again, very on the nose. Good job, Jaroslav, there. But, and I will let you read the book to see if these are benevolent oligarchs or 2025 real life oligarchs. I'm gonna just let you read that and figure that out. But remember, it's a Czech book, so hint. But at the same time, you have Teresa, who has to reunite with her half-brother that she's never met back in the Czech Republic, who himself is kind of a anti-immigrant Führer, but maybe he's potentially able to be reformed. We don't know. But the book goes through and introduces all these characters really well. Even Adela's old mom, who's like 90. It's always terrible to think about what happens with someone who's so old that's going to survive their children here. But yeah, when you have a discussion like this, and the premise of the book, it's in the title of Who Wants to Live Forever? Well, I think the exploration of where the book kind of goes through here at the end is very important, because you have the frame story again, the war with the Newts. You have somebody who's just made it to America, has her whole life in front of her. Things are going very well. She is even just picked up off a beach and is like, oh my God, I'm going to be in a movie. I'm just so excited about everything that's coming, everything that's going to be going. And it's just all so great until the point where she actually, without going into too much details, ends up back in Europe with a baby, just runs from the whole situation with her child. So at the same time, we have someone here who's like, okay, I'm going to visit my daughter. I've got this essentially a golden ticket to America with my daughter, who is in the lead biotech firm, and sits down and gets to have coffee with their daughter and say, okay, daughter's like, I promise we're going to talk tomorrow. It's going to be great. We're going to go out and just have a walk around New York City, and we're going to work on this thing. I have all the tools with me, and I am literally going to cure your cancer right here because we can do it. And then that night, Adela dies. So what does she want? I mean, you got to think back and you got to look really from what the author's trying to get at here. What does any dead person really want? Do they want what's best for their children? Do they stay as a ghost to float around here just because of, I don't know, some unfinished business or something like that? You got to remember that Adela here, and the author does a great job staying grounded. She's lived a life with a lot of stuff going on. She was briefly part of some revolutionaries that were anti-establishment people that were spreading out leaflets for anti-Soviet stuff until she got locked up and then was like, oh shit, this is terrible, and she snuck out of the country. So she's had a lot of experiences. But ultimately, she's not the one that pulls the strings. And if you do happen to read this book at the end, I think one of the most powerful areas, and this is where Spaceman of Bohemia is really powerful too. So I'll say as well, this author here can write a thing, but can also finish the thing really well, which is excellent. Because you have this amazing scene at the end where you have all but one of the primary characters, well, really all but two of the primary characters just involved or there. And you have one character that can essentially make a choice. And that choice is essentially, do we give the main character, Adela, what she wants? Or do we do something else? So in the Czech style, you have one character that really wants something, but it is not in their hands at all. Then you have somebody else who has the power to make that choice. But one of the things, and this is, I guess, where it's a good point to leave here, because I don't want to belabor these too long, is that we're in 2025 now. And at least sitting in here in America, one of the big issues that we have facing as a nation right now is access to information. And this isn't just stuff that's going on in the news where you have all kinds of social media and internet platforms bending the knee and saying, essentially, we're going to start restricting content, changing the algorithm to feed people certain information that we want. But one of the things that A Brief History of Living Forever explores as well is what happens when somebody has that limited amount of information and gets to kind of try to make that own choice. Are they going to make the choice that serves their own best interest? Are they going to make the choice that serves somebody else's best interest? And more importantly, if somebody's there to pull the strings, once again putting it back here to right now, whose interest is being served by whatever 2 tracks, 3 tracks, 4 tracks of information that are going on right now out in the world? You have essentially primary sources, which I was always taught, at least, and tried to teach people, rely on the information that's on the ground. But it is getting harder and harder to find that information because it's through so many filters, so many opinions, so much other stuff here. And I think one of the brilliant moments at the end of this book, and if you've read it, you probably know what I'm talking about here, is what filter that very important decision, a decision that could ultimately change the world, change what's going on at the biotech company, really just change the prospect of immortality for anybody. One person gets to make that call, but they get to make it with a stacked deck. And the payoff at the end of this book is it's not just about the main character, what Adela wants. Everybody gets to go through that calculus of what do they want. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what you're sitting, the end result is very realistic. So I highly recommend this book. It is a great read. It's funny at times. Like I said, not haha funny all the time, but it is very well written. You get to meet some characters and really kind of feel out how they process going through everything. And I think it is depressingly, unfortunately, a lens for the world that we are careening towards right now. So it's not just a good book, but it's an important book to read. So I highly, highly recommend it. So thank you all for taking the time to at least listen here. Like I said, I don't want to make these sort of reviews, if you want to call them that, or discussions too long, but I do actually recommend both of these books as well. So we're going to I just want to leave it here with this and say, if you all have any stuff that you're reading, feel free to talk about in the comments. I also have a book discussion area in the Discord, which I promise I'm going to undust and make work there. So you're welcome to pop in if you want to see, but otherwise, thanks for listening. Thanks for going through this. We're going to do this again soon. I have a few books. Like I said, I did a lot of reading in 2024, so I have a bit of a backlog, but I've already got some more stuff that I'm reading as well. I'm happy for book suggestions, but otherwise, if you've actually read this book, tell me what you think, because it's a doozy, but it's a good one. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you all being here. We'll do this again soon, I promise. Take care.